Thank you very much, Helen. I'd like to acknowledge firstly the traditional owners. I also want to acknowledge all the many distinguished guests, MPs, international visitors. I won't name them all individually, but I want to thank you all for your attendance today. And of course, I want to thank Lucy and her family for being such tireless campaigners in this space. I mean, this is an incredible effort to organise something like this and to bring the sort of people you've got together in the one place to discuss this important issue. It's a credit to you. You know, some people, when faced with adversity, collapse inwards. I think I would. But you've been, you know, an inspiration to a lot of people. So thank you for putting this together, and thank you to you and your family. Let me just give you a bit of context to how I came to this issue, because I think it's sort of important. We're all here for different reasons. We come from different backgrounds. Before I became a senator and dropped down near used car salesman in terms of how people respect you, I was actually a medical doctor, so I know what it's like to go from, you know, someone who's fairly well respected in society to right down the bottom of the ladder. Now, as a medical doctor, I worked in a number of different settings, but I spent some time as a drug and alcohol clinician. I treated people who had substance dependence issues, so providing drug substitution treatments, things like morphine and so on. So I don't come at this from the perspective that any drug is all good or all bad. Every drug has, whether it be Panadol, whether it be alcohol, whether it be cannabis, all drugs have the potential for good and also the potential for harm. So that's the perspective I bring. And I've seen people who have had tremendous benefit from cannabis, but I've also seen people get into trouble with it. So that's what I bring to the discussion. And I suppose like a lot of medical practitioners, I didn't know a lot about the potential medicinal benefit of cannabis, but I started to learn a little more. I met people who were lobbying to have the law changed. I spoke to a number of eminent specialists and professionals, looked at the evidence myself, and I'm someone who's trained in evidence. So that's just what comes with, I suppose, your professional background in medicine, is that you're trained in evidence, the scientific method. People come to you with all sorts of claims about particular substances and whether they're going to be good for you or bad for you. The whole scientific process is designed to investigate it with some degree of rigour. You have an idea or a hypothesis, you put it out there, you design trials, you test, you get feedback from your colleagues, they criticise you, you do further trials. It's a process, the scientific process that, you know, something I'm committed to. And what became really clear through my work looking at medicinal cannabis is actually it's not a question of the jury being out. For a number of conditions, evidence is crystal clear. We know it works. We know that it's effective. We know that it provides relief for people suffering a range of symptoms. And we're still treating people like criminals who need to access it. So as someone who moved away from medicine to becoming a legislator, I suppose I thought, why have we got this block here? Well, we've got some very clear evidence for a product that we know provides benefit. We know that some of the people who get the most benefit are tremendous degrees of pain and suffering. What is it that's holding us back from being able to make this available through a legal framework? So the first step was I became the co-chair of the parliamentary group that looks at drug law reform. Now, I've got a view around illicit drugs more generally that we've got it wrong. We've got the whole system wrong, that many of the things that we're doing are actually creating a lot more harm than actually protecting people. But this specific issue, I come at it from the view of what is it that that's stopping us from making an effective medicine available to people. Now, when Dr. Mel Washer, who's a former Liberal Member of Parliament who became a friend during the last Parliament, when he left as co-chair of this parliamentary group that looked at drug law reform issues, I was lucky enough to become one of the co-chairs of that group, and I've been working with other politicians to say, well, there are a lot of issues we can look at around drug law reform, but let's start with something that should be a no-brainer. We've got something that we know works, that's going to relieve people of pain and suffering. Let's just try and get this made legal and available to people. So I worked with my cross-parliamentary colleagues. The first thing we did was, well, maybe the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA, it's the body that's responsible for making decisions about whether drugs should be available in Australia. We thought, well, let's go to the TGA and let's see whether there's an opportunity to work with the TGA to make this drug available. What's holding it back from being listed through the TGA process? So we had a briefing on that, and we learnt that the TGA model's it's not designed to be able to deal with this. It's designed for drugs where a pharmaceutical company sponsors a drug, the drug is then regulated, the TGA gives it a tick and says, yes, it's available for use in Australia, and then we decide whether it's going to be subsidised through a separate process, whether it's going to be listed on the PBS, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. But it's the TGA that decides whether a medicine or a drug is legal. And the TGA is just not designed to be able to deal with something that is a natural product, that's a plant, that's not being sponsored by a pharmaceutical company. The model itself doesn't allow us to deal with it. So there have been a few drugs that have got through that are cannabis substances. So, for example, a drug called Sativex. Now, Sativex got through the TGA process, but for it to get through that process, there were restrictions made on what it could be used for, very clear restrictions, so only for multiple sclerosis. And secondly, it was very, very expensive. It was over $500 a month for treatment. So you're never going to get a pharmaceutical company to sponsor one of these drugs if the TGA is going to be very, very limited in terms of the use it allows for that drug, doesn't allow it to be used in other circumstances apart from very, very narrow and prescriptive circumstances. Secondly, a drug company is not going to want to sponsor a drug and charge people a lot of money for it if there's a alternative where people can get the drug illegally but much, much more cheaply. So you get to a point where the cost becomes prohibitive and people will just continue to access it on the black market. And the third thing with the TGA is the patent process. For a pharmaceutical company to want to invest in a drug, it needs to know that no one else, a competitor, can't come in and basically copy that drug and sell it. So we have this thing called patents. But again, it's very difficult to patent what is a natural drug. So the TGA, it was obvious, this is the wrong model for ensuring that people get access to medicinal cannabis. So the next step was, what do we do? What else can we do? What are the other opportunities that would allow people to get access to this medicine? Now, the states have, various state governments and state parliamentarians, and I'll pay tribute here to my Green colleagues in Tasmania, Cassie O'Connor and Shane Rattenbury in the ACT. I don't know if there's any others, but who have been moving, and of course the Premier, who I think came and opened today's event, and good on him for doing that. But having the states go this alone isn't going to address some of the really fundamental issues, which is about how do we get the stuff grown in a way where people who need it as a medicine know exactly what they're getting, know what purity they're getting, know what quality they're getting, and are able to get it through a legal framework. So what we did was we then looked at what was going on internationally. What are some of the countries that are doing this in different settings? How are they regulating it? And there are examples in Holland, there are examples in Canada, Israel, other examples. And we looked at all of those, and what we tried to do was come up with a model that reflected some of the best elements in those international models for delivering cannabis to people. We also were hamstrung by, I'm sure you've spoken about it today, but the Convention on Narcotic Drugs. What is it that we can do within the convention that Australia signed on to? Well, interestingly, we already do. We're allowed to grow poppies, which are used to produce opium, and that's used for a whole lot of medicinal reasons. We use it as a painkiller. It's available in hospitals through preparations like morphine and pethidine and so on. And the convention actually provides an exemption for growing opium and for cannabis for medicinal reasons. So we're not actually hamstrung by the single convention, that international treaty that we've signed onto along with many other countries. So what we did was we came up with effectively a bill that says the TGA is the wrong model. We need to have a separate regulator that takes control of the growing of cannabis, the processing, the distribution, and the dispensing of cannabis. It's got to be a separate regulator, not the Therapeutic Goods Administration, that effectively manages this whole process. So we've got a bill that sets up this regulator. What it does is it says, we're going to set up this panel. It's a panel of experts ranging right through the supply chain to the distribution chain. So we have botanists and horticulturalists on the panel. We have pharmacologists, we have doctors, we have community members. So we've been clear about who we think should be on this panel, and their role is to effectively oversee the growing, the processing, the distribution and the dispensing of this drug, as well as ensuring that we're targeting research in the right areas. So it's a body that has that mandate right across the all of the areas that we know are necessary. So while it's great that some state governments have said, we don't think people should be treated like criminals, and we're going to ask the police effectively to look away if someone's accessing this drug for medicinal reasons, unless we deal with the supply side, we're only tackling half the issue. It's one thing to say, well, you shouldn't feel like criminals, but it's another thing to say, well, people should know what they're getting. They should know what they're getting is of a particular purity. They should know exactly the concentrations of the active ingredients, what works best for them, and to know exactly what they buy is what's written on the label. And that's what this bill does. It effectively looks at the supply chain right through to making it available to people who need it. Now, the whole process is not meant to challenge existing drug laws. It's not meant to say if people are found to be using cannabis for recreational purposes, that we're going to change that. Now, I think, as it turns out, I think that is a conversation we need to be having, and I think that individuals who are using cannabis for recreational purposes, who are then subject to a criminal penalty, I think that's where it's a huge mistake, and it's something we do need to change. But I feel that thank you. But I do feel that if we are going to get somewhere in this debate around medicinal cannabis, then we have to be very clear. This is about medicinal cannabis, that this is not about recreational cannabis. And again, I'll go back to the point I made. I don't think any drug is perfectly safe, regardless of what it is. And cannabis, like all other drugs, does have potential for harm. We've got to be careful about how we regulate it. The medicinal cannabis regulator effectively says what we're going to do is create a regime that makes people who are sick, who are suffering, where we know the evidence is very clear. We know for nausea from chemotherapy. We know where there are some forms of pain, particularly neurogenic pain. We know for anorexia, that is loss of appetite when you've got a terminal illness. We know for muscle spasms, like things like, for example, from multiple sclerosis. We know it works. We don't need to do more research in those areas. We've just got to get on and make it available. So the bill effectively does all of that. It says where there's clear evidence, we're going to make sure that people get access to it. Where there's not, we'll keep doing further research. We'll get the level of evidence that we need, and we'll make it available for people under those circumstances as well, all through the national regulator that gives the authority to health professionals to dispense it to ordinary people. So that's the plan. That is the plan. It's taken us a while to get to this point because as someone who's come into this issue only over the last few years, it's taken me a while to realise that the only way we're going to move forward is if we create this special independent body, take it out of the hands of politicians and give it to people who actually understand what cannabis does, how effective it is, what the research base is, and then ensure that it's made available to people. The plan is to introduce the bill next week. We were thinking of introducing it this week. We knew we were coming here. We wanted to talk to you first and say, we're going to introduce it next week. We've had good support from, if this is a Greens bill on its own, it's not going to get up. I mean, I'm aware of that. I think in politics, you know, it's like many other professions. People want to, have their fair share of ownership of it. And if it's someone else's idea, they won't support it. So I've been working very, very hard to get cross-party support. And I have to say, people like Sharman Stone from the Liberal Party, Mel has been a champion of this issue for a long time, but Sharman Stone from the Liberal Party, Melissa Park from the Labor Party, we've got some crossbench senators, all of whom have said, we are prepared to put our name to this bill and co-sponsor it. So this is not going to be seen just as a Greens bill, this will be seen as a cross-parliamentary bill. But that's only half the battle. It's only half the battle. One of the reasons for introducing it now, in politics, momentum's everything, and I was very encouraged by the Prime Minister's, albeit private statement to Alan Jones about how important he felt it was that we moved on the issue, and we're going to hold him to that. What we need to do now is we need to build on support from inside both the Coalition and the Labor Party. If it's introduced as a co-sponsored bill, that's only half the battle. The next step is to get both the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader to give him principal support for legislation in this area, and that's the hard bit. That's where all of you are so important. It will be happening next week. I urge you to ensure that you're not just talking to your local members of Parliament, but to as many members of Parliament as you can, to let them know we've got a bill coming before the Parliament, that it is going to be an opportunity to give people, many of whom are in their final few months, some relief from suffering and pain, and to throw their weight behind it. That's really what we need from you, is to contact members of Parliament. Many of you have come from far afield, and let them know that it's very important that they support their colleagues in passing this bill. I think there's some momentum building, I really do. I feel that a forum like this, I think we've got really powerful advocates, and that's critically important when you're talking about a reform like this. People like Lucy and others. We've got people like Helen and other organisations who have been prepared to give voice to it through the hugely powerful forum that they have in the media. And all of those things, I think, have come together. Well, we've now got the Prime Minister of the country who said he's prepared to look at it and he thinks we should be moving. Well, let's make him move. Let's make him move. That's where we're at. So thanks, everyone.